part of our operating system from the day we're born, such as language, culture, and our sense of place in the world. Upgrading this operating system takes a certain amount of work. And then there are the apps, like on your iPad or whatever. The apps, those are the practical skills that you've got. And one of the first of these apps that I learned from my mother was how to make your clothes match. If your plaid or printed shirt had even a little bit of the color that was in your pants or your skirt, then you were good to go. Sewing was another app that came free with my operating system. Her grandmother had been a dressmaker, and Mom sewed many of her own clothes when we were young, and our clothes, and her daughters all followed suit, so to speak. More recently, Frenchies replaced sewing, and she shopped at Frenchies with great skill. She taught me early about getting the most for your money, the persuasive power of advertising which one must resist, the glory of finding something at 50% off. I learned how to paint and wallpaper, and how to create a home environment that reflected one's tastes and personality, or at least her tastes and personality. As a United Church minister's wife, she had to endure the manse committees, who leaned towards gray wallpaper when she yearned for color. The first room she was allowed to paint was a kitchen in sunny yellow. She reveled in how it shocked some of the people on the manse committee. The cooking apps evolved over the years, from when the four of us were small and our favorite dish was made from macaroni, Velveeta processed cheese, evaporated milk, and a can of tomato soup. We made this creamy orange mixture. We loved it. No craft dinner for us. In the 1970s, she discovered granola, whole grains and macrobiotic cooking, and Birkenstocks, when they were only fashionable on the alternative fringe. That's when I started to realize that she was ahead of her time. She was upgrading her operating system too. I was quite young when I read her copy of Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex, which was one of the early tracts of the second wave of feminism in the 60s. Later, she made sure I had my own copy of Germaine Greer's The Female Unit. You might remember it, the one with the naked female torso hanging from the line, clothesline. She attended local women's groups and coffee houses in Sydney, where Rita McNeil was playing before she got famous. She taught me how to type with all of my fingers, and that's a very useful app that I'm sure some of you would probably like to have on your iPad. This was an app that she picked up at business college in Charlottetown after she'd gone as far as her one-room country school could take her, which was grade 10. Business college qualified her to be a secretary, though she really didn't want to be a secretary. She did so well there that she was offered help to go to Holland College, which became UPEI, but it was too far out of her comfort zone at that time, and she declined the offer. And she came to regret that decision, but later she overcame it with much effort when she earned a Bachelor of Social Work part-time while raising 4 children. And she was, when I posted her graduation picture on Facebook when she was in the hospital, she was very pleased that I put it there because she wanted people to know she was a university graduate and it had taken a great effort. I took it for granted that I would go to university, but she didn't. She was thrilled when I was accepted in the university, and even more so when I was offered scholarships. But a certain lack of self-confidence, a fear of taking your place in the world, had become part of my operating system as well. In the 1950s, the church was a very important institution in rural areas. It could connect the thinking person with a larger worldview. Young people could meet other interesting young people. There were career opportunities, even if your ambitions did not extend to becoming a minister. And so after a few years of work, Mom enrolled in a new winter program at the Atlantic Christian Training Center, which is now the Tatamagouche Center, which many of you I'm sure have heard of because they do a lot of interesting work, not just along the Christian vein. And she had the idea maybe she would work as a church secretary, and there she met my father. He offered her, euphemistically, a permanent job, which, as they both understood, meant marriage, children, and the life of a minister's wife. It was the tail end of the baby boom, and Mum felt constrained by the limited roles imposed on women, centered on home, family, and church. Living in the fishbowl of a rural or small town church with 4 children was not easy. There were high expectations and a lot of local politics. Who could you really be friends with? Such friendships as my parents had tended to be with other ministers and their wives in other towns. Fortunately, the human potential movement captured the attention of some leaders in the United Church. The Tatamagouche Center was the scene of many workshops starting in the 1960s. They offered the chance to upgrade your personal operating system. Mum attended as many as she could, and those led to others. She plumbed the depths of her early childhood experiences. Understanding and analyzing your inner self and those close to you, for better or worse, was part of our world. It got pretty intense sometimes, especially as we left home and made our own explorations. We each reacted in our own way to this, but for Pam and I, when we were in our early 20s, trips home could be like entering an emotional crucible. But I learned to believe that the healing of old emotional wounds is possible, and that we can emerge from old pain as better functioning people. And I learned from my mother that we don't stop growing when our bodies stop growing. Adult life is an ongoing developmental process, as I'm sure most of you know, and if you don't, you're going to find out. My mother and some of us were also exploring the spiritual nature of reality through personal experience, various groups, and books, especially books, which we traded back and forth. Out of that work emerged deeper understandings of the soul, God, and our relationships. Those of us who pursued this path, along with our mother, became and remain convinced that we are spiritual beings having a physical experience and not the other way around. That our souls survive the transition we call death. That there is a natural order to how one lifetime influences another. That there are higher spiritual levels of being beyond this world. And that at the highest level, we are all one. My mother called this her faith, and considered it the most important gift she could give her children. Meanwhile, my parents' marriage had not survived. Another lesson for me, as I was close to both my parents, I learned not to take sides. I learned how to see a situation from 2 very different points of view. Eventually, June met Charles through their sons, as Charles has said. They had a wonderful romance in marriage, and though I knew it wasn't always easy, I'm very glad for her that it happened because he was more compatible for her than my father was. And she blossomed. In photos from the 1980s, some of which I hadn't seen until she went in the hospital and then more recently, she looks radiantly beautiful and happy. So for me, it's been like a discovery of this period of her life when I was busy off being in my 20s. And I'm also very grateful to the 3 of them, my mother, my father, and Charles, that we were able to have our holiday dinners together all through these years, and especially after Malcolm was born. Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving, we spent together with the 3 of them. And I'm very grateful for that. From my mother, also, I learned that parenting doesn't end just because your kids have grown up and moved away from home. If there's a crisis in your child's life, you will want to do whatever is in your power to help them. Establishing a separate identity from one's mother is an important growth task for daughters, as about 50% of you will probably know. And one of the there are some of you who knew us both and didn't realize we were related. Because when I came to the South Shore with my family 10 years ago, I made a point of not getting involved in her groups and activities. My loss, I'm sure. There were things that I learned from my mother that I had to unlearn. I learned to be less fearful of the world, more bold, more adventurous, more self-confident, more self-reliant. I learned to trust people more and open myself to others more easily. I learned to be more easygoing, more adaptable. Being taller and somewhat more extroverted helped me upgrade that part of my operating system. I learned to be less self-conscious about my appearance. She was an exceptionally well-dressed woman and always noticed what you were wearing. I finally even learned to wear something nice for her to notice. And then her work with me was done, and she could die in peace. One of my hardest lessons has been to learn to recognize my own feelings. Her feelings took up a lot of space in her relationships. The other hard lesson was learning to let go of needing her approval. I knew that I had achieved some success when she declared that I wasn't as nice as I used to be. But we had always competed for authority. And I had to learn that it didn't always matter whether or not I was right. During her last month, which she spent in hospital, I came to learn, I came to learn a few more things about her. Her exquisite sensitivity to color. It was almost all she needed. And one of her last great pleasures. The evolving bouquet of flowers in her room gave her enormous joy and satisfaction. Her need to create order in her environment. In hospital, this shrank to what she could reach from the bed, and she was very particular about it. Her love and concern for her husband. Between them, I saw a marriage that had reached a right level of maturity and passed its final test with flying colors. How quickly and completely she let go of her long-held self-delusion that she was going to get better. Once the diagnosis was clearly explained to her, scales fell from her eyes, and she could see what was obvious to the rest of us, that her condition was deteriorating very rapidly. And this is where her faith kicked in. I prefer to think of it as sure knowledge. She expressed no fear. She was light and bright. Yes, she had a few regrets, things she would have liked to do, but she appreciated those last days when we were able to bring all the family to be with her, including Shirley. Hi, Shirley, who's on Skype. Shirley is her sister, and she's watching on Skype here. But she appreciated those last days to the best of her capacity to do so. She died well, and that was the ultimate gift she gave to those who loved her.